In this video, I'm going to talk about how to download and set up the Cisco CSR1000v in Hyper-V. Now, the Cisco CSR1000v is a virtual router provided by Cisco, performs many, if not all of the commands that your normal Cisco routers perform, except it's a virtual platform. This is really great if you don't necessarily need the physical environment, you just need the capabilities that the router provides for you, or specifically in instances where you're trying to learn about Cisco routers, trying to learn about the iOS, how it all works together. So in this video, I'm going to briefly talk over how I was able to download it and hopefully how you will be able to download it and then set it up in a Hyper-V environment. So my initial process here of trying to find the Cisco 1000v actually had to do with VMware. Specifically, I was trying to run it or find an OVA file in order to run the Cisco in a VMware environment, as opposed to Hyper-V. So I started going through some of these links, and those didn't necessarily pop anything up. So yeah, just Googled CSR1000v download OVA. Sure, whatever. It wasn't until this third link that I found, VMware with Cisco CSR1000v. And I clicked on that, and in here, along with the description of how to set this up in Cisco, there is a URL, a link that took me to Cisco's webpage. I did log in. I do have a Cisco account, so hopefully you do as well. And I was able to download this OVA file right here. So when I did it, it prompted me, it said, please log in, make sure your information is up to date, and accept the export requirements and so on. So when I did that, I also noticed down here is a ISO file, .iso. So that means I should be able to run this VM on a non-VMware environment. So I would be able to run it in a Hyper-V environment on my desktop for local testing. So I went ahead and I downloaded this. Now, one thing to note is the version here. This is specifically version 3.1102. On the left-hand side here, we can see that's all the way down here, 3.112, and then S, ED, whatever those letters actually mean. There are newer versions coming all the way up to version 17, 17.11. And when I tried to download these, it told me I didn't have permissions to. You need to have an active support account with Cisco. The older version, the 3.11, seemed to work without a valid Cisco account or without an active Cisco support account. So that's why I'm staying with that one for right now. I'm assuming that means that it's not necessarily too many legal concerns with me running that in a test lab. All right, so once I downloaded that to my machine, I then went into Hyper-V. So Hyper-V, zoom on in here. I'm just gonna go ahead and say create a new virtual machine. Walks me through the nice little wizard. I'm gonna call this CSR2 because I already created a CSR1 and I want to have more than one router in my environment. So next, Gen 1 virtual machine. I'm not sure if the newer versions, the 17s, support Gen 2, so I'm going to stay with Gen 1. Specific memory. When I tried this on the VMware environment, it assigned it 2560 megs worth of RAM, and I'm going to uncheck use dynamic memory. The newer versions, if you get into the 16s and 17s, they start talking about having 4 or 8 gigs of RAM here. So you would definitely need to have a higher amount there if you're using more or a newer VM. However, like I said, when I downloaded the OVA, I loaded this up into VMware, and this is the amount of memory it assigned the virtual machine. Right now for networking, I'm going to leave that one alone because I want to configure more than one interface on here, and I can't do that through this GUI or through this wizard. Hard disk, I'm actually going to say attach later because this is a VHDX file, and everything I've read said that the machines or the CSR1000 does not support VHDX. The next and finish. All right, so there's my CSR2. If I go into settings specifically for this, we'll see it is set boot from CD, memories 2560, dynamic memory is disabled. It's got one processor, which for a lab environment is way more than enough. And then under IDE controller, I want to add a hard drive. Comes up with this option. What type of hard drive do you want? Where do you want it to be in your cycle? And what I want to do is I want to say new. I don't want to use an existing hard disk. I want to create a new one. And in this wizard here, we can say I want a VHD file as opposed to a VHDX. Fixed size. Call this CSR2 for the file name. And then for the size, 8 gigabytes. Remember, this is a router. The only thing that's going to be on this is the boot image as well as the configurations. And that 8 gigs is going to be way more than is actually necessary. Next and finish. So this creates our hard drive for us. Once that's done, let's continue on. DVD drive. I want to specify the image for the download that I just created, or the ISO I just downloaded. So I just pointed to the ISO file for the CSR 3.1102. And then network adapter, we'll put the first one to my private one, and then I'm going to come up to add hardware. I'm going to add another network adapter, put that to private 2, add another network adapter, and we'll put that to private 3. From what I've read, these CSR1000s can have upwards of 8 interfaces. However, in this evaluation mode, I would be very surprised if you needed more than 3. Continuing on in the settings, there is a way to be able to set up a COM port so that you can configure the router via PuTTY, in which case you would specify a named pipe. The documentation said it was possible. I'm not really sure it's even necessary. So I'm going to just say none for both of those. And then at that point, we're pretty much done. Turn off the automatic start action and say OK. At this point, our CSR is pretty much built. What we can do now is connect to it and start it on up. So this is booting from the ISO, booting from the CSR ISO. And what it's going to do is it's actually going to boot up and it's going to install itself on that hard drive. So I don't actually have to do anything to make it install off of that hard drive. That will take a couple of minutes. When it's done, I will go ahead and shut this down and then make sure the DVD drive is disconnected. And then we'll boot it up again just to confirm that it is fully working. All right, and thanks to the power of video editing, that did not take very long for you. Honestly, it didn't take very long for me either. I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 minutes. It would have been really boring for you to watch it. However, so I fast forwarded it for you. As you can see, what's on the screen right now, it's asking us if we want to start the initial configuration dialog. This is what you would expect when you first power on a router or a switch that has no configuration built into it. A few lines above that, you can see that it's actually booting up as a Cisco CSR1000v with so much memory and the processor, how many interfaces, and so on. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go ahead and just shut this guy down. So shut down should hopefully cleanly shut down the operating system. And actually, while that's shutting down, let's go ahead and look at the settings. What we'll notice when we look into the settings, primarily right here, the DVD drive is set to none. So even though we booted the very first time with a DVD in there, it installed the operating system onto the hard drive, onto that 8 gig hard drive, and then kicked out the DVD drive from it. So now when we boot, we are literally booting from the hard drive. It is fully installed on this machine, And then even as Grub comes up here in just a second, it will give us a menu of, do you want to continue on with the configuration you have, or do you want to revert back to your golden image? So I could actually click the down arrow, choose golden image, and it would revert back to no configurations whatsoever. So when this boots up, and routers and switches are not generally the fastest to boot, we should be able to go into the configuration and start configuring it as if it's a physical router. Now that we've rebooted, let's go ahead and let's just look at the configurations. I'm going to say no, I don't want to go into the initial configuration dialog. We've started up. It's giving me a prompt with the router name of router. There we go. I can type enable to go into enable mode, show run in order to see the full configuration of the system. I gave it 3 interfaces, so it automatically identifies as having 3 interfaces in there. At this point, I can go conf t in order to go to configuration mode. Int G1, it's gigabit 1 as opposed to like gigabit 01 that you may be familiar with in other routers. And then IP address, let's see, 192.168.0.11, subnet mask 255.255.255.0, description, test plan, and no shot. And now it's gone ahead and it's saved that, or I'm sorry, it's configured that interface. And now if I exit out and I do a wrmem for write the memory, it's now writing the configuration, and now when I reboot, it will have the same configuration. So at first glance, it looks like the CSR1000v is a great configuration tool for being able to learn how to configure and manage these Cisco devices. I know they're fairly limited when they're not licensed. Limited meaning like a 100K throughput as opposed to the gigabit throughput that you would expect on a gig interface. But for an unlicensed router where you're simply trying to learn how Cisco routing works, this is a great solution. So I hope this has been helpful for you, and I hope you are able to do this for yourself in the future.